Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today we're going to paint this Morannon Orc. So to start with, I've primed him with black. First thing I'm going to do is paint all of his armour. So I'm coming in with lead belcher, catching everything that will be metallic. So that's things like all this armour on his skin, see the head of his spear, and he's also got a lot of armour on his arms and his boots as well. So make sure you come in, catch that with 1 or 2 coats of lead belcher. Make sure you get a good solid coat. Don't need to be too neat at this stage, but do make sure you catch everything that we're going to want to be silver. After 2 coats, the lead belcher looks really nice. So now I'm going to come in with some Morannon oil. I'm just going to shade all over the model to make sure we catch everything that we've just painted. Make sure you work some of this into any of the recesses to get a nice bit of shade to all the armour. Shade now dry, you can see the definition to that armour's really starting to come out. So next I'm coming in with Necron compound and giving a dry brush all over the model. This is why we didn't have to worry about being too neat before. So make sure you catch everything, catch all of the raised edges, give it a nice dry brush with Necron compound. Now that the metal's completed, it's all got a nice highlight to it. So now what I'm going to do next is come in with some Abaddon black. I'm going to paint everything else now on the model, because we'll have caught some of that with the dry brushing stage. You don't want any of that silver to come through to other things. So I'd give everything on the model a nice base coat of Abaddon black. So be careful here, you don't want to paint this over the silver we've already done and highlighted. Just work your way around. Catch everything else we don't want to be silver with a base coat of black. So now I'm going to paint all of the fabric on the model. So I'm coming in with corn red, catching everything that's a piece of cloth or clothing. There's lots of little bits tucked away, like here on the arms, the elbows, between lots of the armour panels you can see a little bit of fabric. Just work your way around, catch that with a couple of coats of corn red. It can take 2 or 3 to get a good solid cover, so take your time. Nice thin layers of corn red and catch all of the fabric on the model. Go. After a couple of coats, built a nice solid base cover and covered up all of the fabric that's on the model. So now I'm going to paint his spear. So I'm just coming in with dryad bark, just going to pick out the shaft to his spear. With the base coat applied to his spear. The next thing I'm going to paint is the little bit of fur around his neck. So I'm coming in with Mournfang brown. Just be nice and careful here, you don't want to get this over any of the armour panels that are right next to it. So just work your way around that ruff around his neck, catching all of the fur with the base coat with Mournfang brown. Now with the fur highlighted, the next step is to paint any straps or leather that's on him. So for this I'm coming in with Rhinox hide. I'm picking out things like his belt and all the straps that are holding the armour panels on. So there's some here under his arms, as you can see. Just work your way around the model, picking out everything that looks like a piece of strapping or that we want to be leather. With all the straps and the belt painted up now I'm just going to paint his boots and his hair. So for this I'm using Corvus Black. Just make sure you catch the little bit of boot that's showing at the bottom of his foot and this little mohawk that this guy's got on his head as well. That's the final base colour applied for now. So now what I'm going to do is shade everything we've just painted with known oil. So be careful here, you don't want to get this onto any of the metallics that we've already painted and highlighted. So just work your way around, put in a bit of known oil on everything that we just painted in those last few steps. Now with those shades dry, it's time to highlight some of those areas back up again. So first of all, I'm going to start on the fabric. I'm coming back in with corn red. And now where the shade hasn't settled, so on the most raised areas, putting down a base cover of corn red again, just to bring it back to that original colour. You can see here where the shade settled in between those folds, I'm coming back on either side of it with a layer of corn red. So you have the known oil in the recesses and then corn red back up on the higher areas again. Just work your way around, find where the shade hasn't settled, put a little bit of corn red. Corn red has dried. As you can see, it's really added a bit of definition back into that fabric. So now I'm just going to do an edge highlight with Evil Sun's Scarlet. So for this I just pick the most prominent raised areas and sharpest corners and put a thin line of Evil Sun's Scarlet on them. So this is more like a traditional edge highlight, just on all the most pronounced details. Take your time with this step, work your way around the model, just catching all of the most raised details. There you go, that's the fabric finished. It looks really good for a nice quick easy paint job. So now I'm going to dry brush some Baneblade Brown onto the spear. Be careful with this, you don't want to flick this onto anything we've already painted. Just a nice light dry brush all over the wood. Now with the spear highlighted, time to move on to his straps and leather. So for this I'm using Gawthor Brown, and this is just an edge highlight on all of those straps. So for these little ones on his arm, I just tend to put a single line in the middle of the strap. For the belt here on his back. If you can, try and put one line on either side of it, just to highlight that belt. Keep these nice and thin. Just work your way around the model. Pick out all of the straps. There we go. We've now highlighted all of the straps on the orc. So the next one we're going to highlight is the fur around his neck. So for this I'm coming with Basecoats brown, and just take your time and pick out all of the strands that are on this fur collar to his neck. So be nice and careful with this step. You don't want to miss and get this on anything we've painted already, or get these too thick. Just pick out all of the strands of fur that you can. There we go. Orc's really starting to come together now. So now I'm just going to highlight with a little bit of Mechanica Standard Grey. So I'm going to dry brush onto his hair, nice and light, just to pick out as many of those strands as possible. And also, with a paintbrush, just get a few lines at the back of his boots as well, just to add a little bit of interest to them. And there we go. That's all of those parts highlighted to the Morannon Orc. So now I'm coming in with some Death Guard green. I'm going to paint up all of his skin. So that's obviously his face and his hands. Take your time. You don't want to get this on any of our previous layers. But work nice and carefully in a couple of thin coats until you get a good coverage all over his skin. Go with all of the skin painted, so you've got a nice solid cover after 2 or 3 coats of Death Guard green. So I'm going to shade all that flesh using a Thonian camo shade. So just apply this all over the areas we've just painted with Death Guard green. Shade settled, you can really see it's brought out the definition to his face. So I'm coming in now with some Nurgling green. For this I want to apply this on all the areas where the shade didn't settle and the most raised detail. So sort of his eyebrows, cheeks here, and his nose and mouth as well. Coming with a couple of thin coats of this. Take your time, work your way around, and just pick out all of the raised areas of interest, and get a thin coat of Nurgling green. After a couple of layers of that, you can really see we brought some colour back into his face now, but left that definition showing. So now, one final highlight with Ogryn Camo. Place this on the most raised areas. So that's his eyebrows, his nose, his bottom lip, any sharper angles or edges where you feel the light would catch. So remember to do his ears as well. Just work your way around, catching all the most prominent details with Ogryn Camo. That's the skin highlighted up. Now there's only one thing left to paint on this orc, and that's his eyes. So I'm coming in with some Baden Black and placing that into the sockets of his eyes. Nice and careful, you don't want to slip and get this over all the stuff we've already painted. And then I get some white scar and I place that inside the blinds we just did with black. Also highlight his teeth at this stage as well. He's got a couple of teeth sticking out of his lower jaw. Just catch those with some white scar. And finally, the bad and black as a vertical line in the middle of that white scar we just did in the eyes to act as a pupil. There we are, that's how I paint a Morannon Orc. I hope you enjoyed this video and have fun painting.